Hi guys, good morning. I hope you are all doing well. So for today, I will be discussing as part of the topic of the group 1, which is all about the psychological perspective of the self. So we all know that we had already discussed the different perspectives of the self. From the previous quarter, we have the philosophical perspective, the biblical, physical, and so on. So for this morning, we will be dealing with psychological perspective of the self. So I have the specific part or a specific topic to be discussed in this presentation, and I will also be the one to discuss to present the introductory part of this presentation. Okay, so I will be looking here in the side, and I will be looking at my PPT for reference of these over the flow of this discussion. Okay, so let's begin with our discussion all about psychological perspective of the self. Okay, first I will present to you I will still read the objectives. At the end of the chapter, you should be able to first define and describe the different psychological concepts of the self. Second is differentiate the various concepts of the self and identify their interrelationships. Third is explain how the concept of self influence behavior. And then last is and apply concept of self in one's life to develop self-awareness and self-understanding. Okay. Supposedly, we have an activity which is we or I will be asking you guys, my fellow students, of these three questions. This activity is entitled Unmasking Oneself. And still, I would like to read these three questions. First, who am I when no one is watching? Second, how do my thoughts, feelings, and actions define the kind of person I am? Third, can I truly shape who I become, or am I a product of my past and environment? Okay, so those are the three questions that were supposedly to be asked to you, my fellow students. Okay. Anyway, let's proceed. So let's have an overview of this discussion. First is understanding the psychological perspective of the self allows us to explore how our identity, personality, and behavior develop. So through this discussion of the different psychological perspectives of the self, we will be able to understand and explore how our personality, our identity, our attitude, and values develop and change through time. Second is different theorists offer varying but interconnected views of how we perceive, construct, and understand our own selves. So with this, different theorists offer their different theories all about the perspective of the self. Then while they vary, they are interconnected in understanding on how we perceive, we construct ourselves. Then adolescents in particular form self-understanding by integrating different parts of who they are and developing self-awareness and coherence. So we adolescents or teenagers, we integrate those different parts of ourselves. We all know that we have different characteristics, we have different attitudes and demeanors, and these different parts of who we are, we should integrate them in order for us to form the self understanding and then self coherence. Okay, so let's proceed. Okay, to begin our formal proper discussion, let's take a look at an adage by Carl Jung. And it says here, for a young person, it is almost a sin, or at least a danger, to be too preoccupied with himself. But for the aging person, it is a duty and necessity to devote serious attention to himself. Okay, sorry for the interruption of my niece, guys. Okay, so anyway, let's continue. So what does the adage of Carl Jung mean? Okay, it just simply means that for a younger person daw, it is almost a sin or at least a danger to be too preoccupied by himself. Why? Bakit sinabi yun ni Carl Jung? It's because for him, teenagers or the youth should focus more on like exploration, more on discovery of this world, learning practical skills in life, and building relationships with other people or with peers. And if a younger person indulges in more on reflection, analyzing himself, then he might tend to miss out those experiences that can shape his or her values or his or her identity. Pero daw, for the aging person or yung mga taong tumatanda na, it's very important or it's a duty or it's a necessity for them to really engage in self-reflection, in evaluating themselves on how they have lived throughout their lifetime. And then, in that way, they will be able to make wise decisions, especially if during their retirement and their health, in their family, and everything around them as they grow older. Meaning, ito yung sa self natin, from if we were to compare the younger years sa kapag tumatanda na, magkaiba talaga. And according to Carl Jung, for a younger person, dapat daw mas focus siya sa discovery, sa learning practical skills, and enjoying outward na mga development, and hindi yung sa more on self reflection, para hindi mo ma-miss yung mga yung mga things that you need to enjoy, especially in exploring the world, in taking risks, mga ganon. Pero daw, for an aging person, sa mga tumatanda, just for example, if you're already if you're already 60 years old, then you really have to indulge in self-reflection, in assessing yourself, kung ano yung dapat mong gawin, in finding your purpose, your meaning in life, in making your life become stable, and especially in protecting yourself from mga emotional harm, ganon. Okay. Now, let's proceed to my topic. Actually, ang next nito, we have the William James concept of self, the I self, and the me self, which will be discussed by my member. And yeah, next known is the Carl Rogers self theory, the real self and ideal self. Okay, so this is also my part. Okay, so I will be discussing the Carl Rogers self-theory, the real self and ideal self. So, according kay Carl Roger, we have this real self and the ideal self. Okay, so what does it mean? Carl Rogers defines the self as a flexible, changing perception of personal identity. So, para kay Carl Roger daw, our self daw is flexible, and meaning it is not single or fixed. It is not single nor fixed. It's because it is flexible. It changes. It varies depending on the situation, depending on the circumstances or the experiences that we are in. And then it's a changing perception of personal identity. Meaning, nagbabago talaga yung mga pananaw natin. Nagbabago yung pananaw natin of who we are, of who ourselves really are. And with that, we can infer na it is really shaped by the experiences that we go through in life. So through those experiences, mga circumstances na ating nararanasan, our personal identity or our perception of our personal identity changes and develops through time. Meaning, it is affected by either yung age natin or yung maturity natin or moral development, as well as the mga bagay that surround us. Okay. So the self develops through interactions with significant people and awareness of one's own traits and functioning. So, ang self daw natin, nagde-develop siya or it grows or it matures through interactions with significant people. Just for example, a student, and if you are interacting with, for instance, with your teacher. So, if your teacher, for instance, constantly praises you that you are good at problem solving, then you will likely to form this personal perception or your personal identity of yourself na that you can say, I am a good problem solver because your teacher often praises you na ganyan ka. So with that, your personal identity is shaped through your interactions with significant people, and also your awareness of your own traits, yung mga kaugalian na meron ka, yung mga bagay na kaya mong gawin. Okay, so Rogers highlights the drive towards self-actualization or the fulfillment of one's own potential. So si Carl Roger, hina-highlight din niya yung tinatawag nating drive towards self-actualization, the self-actualization or the fulfillment of one's full potential. So we all know that this self-actualization is very important because it is the attainment of your best and most version of yourself, the best and most nice version of yourself, 'di ba? Kay according nga kang Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, inilagay niya yung self-actualization on top. It's because it's a part in which you will realize or attain your full potential, your best version of yourself. For instance, if you are a musician, for instance, gawin nating example si Marcelo. If Marcelo is a musician, then if he dreams of becoming a better musician, then he will really study, not because he wanted to be famous, or not because he wants to be famous, or not because he wants to earn more money, but it's because it is what he really wants to do in life, because it is what he really thinks his purpose. So yun yung ibig sabihin ng self-actualization, the fulfillment of your potential, of your full potential, ganon. And then central to achieving self-actualization is the development of self-concept. Now, the question is, paano mo maa-achieve yung self-actualization na yun, which is on top of the hierarchy of needs according nga kay Abraham Maslow? If wala kang self-concept, if you do not have this developed self-concept, how can you achieve it if hindi mo nga kilala yung sarili mo, ano yung mga gusto mo sa buhay, ano yung goal mo? If you do not have that self-concept, you will not be able to achieve this self-actualization. It will be difficult for you to achieve it if you do not have the self-concept. That's why, for Carl Roger, in achieving self-actualization, the pinaka-center nun, the central is the development of the self-concept. Okay? Naintindihan? Okay, now let's proceed to the components. So, si self-concept, there are two components. Mayroong dalawang components si self-concept, which is the central in achieving the self-actualization according to Carl Roger. So the two components are the real self and then the ideal self. The real self, the actual perception of who one is and what one can do. So it is your current or or your present, or how you currently see yourself, how you currently view yourself, kung sino ka talaga, or who you really are, and what are the things that you can do. For instance, if you are, for instance, the actual perception of who one is like, ako, si gawin natin example si Clizel, or we can say that Clizel is good at math. So yun, sasabihin natin na si Clizel ay magaling sa math. So it's the actual perception of who she really is and what she really can do. Yung real self mo talaga, yung totoong self mo talaga, without any filters, ganun. And then the ideal self, the person one aspires to become, including goals or ambition. So ito yung ideal self, yung gusto mo talaga, na sana ako yun, the self that you really aspire to become, that someone you wish you are, someone you wish you are. So pwede mo sabihin, I wish I were like him, guwapo, ganun, matalino, ganun. So yun yung ideal self, and it includes your goals and ambitions in life. So another example, kung if you were to compare the real self and the ideal self, so for example, your real self is you are not good in math, yun medyo mahirap para sa in math, and then your ideal self is sasabihin mo, sana I wish I were good at solving mathematical problems. So ganun. Yun yung kaibahan ni real self and ideal self. And I know it's very understandable naman, self-explanatory. And then the closer the ideal self is to the real self, the happier and more fulfilled the person becomes. So in this context, the gap really matters. Kasi, kung the closer daw si real self at saka si ideal self mo, the happier person you become. Kasi daw, if yung gap ni real self and ideal self is malaki, then you will tend to become dissatisfied or unhappy. According to her, the greater the gap, the more likely dissatisfaction and unhappiness will occur. So dapat daw yung real self mo, yung kung sino ka talaga, kung ano yung kaya mong gawin, at saka yung ideal self, yung mga gusto mong ma-achieve, the person you aspire to become or you wish that you were, should dapat mas closer sila, kasi the more closer sila, the more na mas magiging satisfied or fulfilled or happy ka. Kasi if the more malaki yung gap nung dalawa, the ideal self and the real self, the more likely na magiging dissatisfied ka. Okay, so let's have another example. So if you're a person who is kumbaga average lang sa in a certain thing, and then you aspire to become somehow a superstar or what, then probably merong disappointments. For another example, if you are a person who always gets with honors, then kumbaga masasabi natin siguro somehow na, for instance lang na you are an average, and then if you aspire to become if yung ideal self mo is maging with highest honors, something na mataas talaga, then more likely na there is disappointment or there is this dissatisfaction. It's because yung real self mo, yung mga na-achieve mo is medyo malayo sa kung ano yung ideal self mo or kung ano yung ina-aspire mo to become. So with that, it really needs na that person should do his or her best in order to achieve the ideal self that he or she wants to achieve. For instance, let's say you are a teacher, then if you are a teacher, you see yourself, which is the real self, that you are a caring teacher and a responsible teacher, and then your ideal self is you want to become a school principal. So with that, malaki talaga yung gap nun, and then it may lead to dissatisfaction. However, if you're a teacher, if you study a lot, mag master's degree, mag-doctoral, ganon, and you will gain experiences and so on, the things that really required para maging school principal ka, then it will not be impossible for you to achieve your ideal self. That's why with this, in order na ma-shrink yung gap between the real self and the ideal self, kailangan talagang gawin yung best mo in order to make sure na medyo maliit lang talaga yung gap ni real self and ideal self, or para maging mas closer si real self mo sa iyong ideal self in order for you to feel happy and for you to feel fulfilled. Okay? So naintindihan ba yung two components sa self-concept, which is the real self and then the ideal self. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. Okay, so we also have here the multiple versus unified self and true versus false self. Okay, so adolescents often experience multiple selves depending on different roles and relationships. The challenge is to integrate these roles into a unified self for stability and consistency. So we all know that we have these multiple selves. So what does it mean na meron tayong multiple selves? It's because iba-iba yung version ng ating self depending on the context, depending on the circumstances, depending on the situation, depending on the setting where you are in. For instance, in school, you have the different version of yourself when you are in school, when you are with your friends, with your family, when you are with your romantic lover. So iba-iba yung version, iba-iba yung ugali mo, iba-iba yung ikaw, iba-iba yung pagkatao na pinapakita mo in different settings, 'di ba? So with that, the challenge is to integrate these roles daw into a unified self for stability and consistency. Now, it does not mean na you should have this outcome na dapat same yung self mo or yung pagkatao mo across all roles or all relationships or all settings, but you should have daw this core identity. What does it mean by this core identity? This core identity should tie all those roles together in a unified and coherent one. So for instance, 'di ba, we have these multiple versions of ourselves sa school, sa with your family, with your romantic partners and whoever. Then there should have the core identity, for instance, honesty. So with that, kahit iba-iba yung setting, iba-iba yung mga taong nakakasalamuhan mo, kahit may iba-ibang version ka na ginagamit of yourself when you are encountering with other people, pero you have this honesty. You always do your best, or you always strive to maintain the honesty when you are when you are dealing with different people, na kahit sino ka man, mapa sa school ka man, in your family, with your friends or romantic lover, there is what you call that honesty, a sense of self, or a sense of value na ini-integrate mo in order to tie those roles, in order for you to have this coherent and unified self. Na kahit, for instance, ako, kahit iba-iba yung version ng self ko, depende sa people, depende sa circumstances, but I have this honesty. This honesty is the value that ties all those roles, all those relationship, all those settings na meron ako into one and coherent self. So yun yung ibig sabihin, that meron ka dapat core identity, because it is unrealistic naman, 'di ba, na kung sino ka sa classroom niyo, kung sino ka with your friends, kung sino ka with your family, is same lang, 'di ba? It's very impossible na yung ugali mo sa pamilya mo, ugali mo sa friends mo, and ugali mo sa teacher mo is same lang. So 'di ba, hindi. So yun, dapat you have the core identity that ties all those roles together. Okay. So that shared value, or that honesty, keeps your roles become coherent. Okay. So let's proceed to the true self versus a false self. Now, according kay Donald Winnicott, he distinguished true self and then false self. Now, the true self daw is the authentic, genuine part of the person. So of course, it's very self-explanatory na the true self, it's really the part of yourself na it's really real and alive. So it is really who you are, with no filters, with no ito talaga yung tunay na ikaw, the genuine part of yourself. And then the false self, on the contrary, is a protective facade shown to please or impress others. So si false self daw, it is a protective daw, it's like a mask that you use or you wear in order to impress or to please other people na nagsusurround sa iyo. So here, the true self, for instance, the true self is ikaw. You really love you really love kids. Now, since you really love kids, you really love little children, then you are caring to them. So kahit no one tells you to become kind to little children, no one tells you to help them, to teach them, but because it is what you really want, it is really who you are, it is really your true self, then you are doing it without external influence or external control. Kahit hindi ka nila pinipraise, kahit hindi ka nila inuutusan na gawin yung mga magagandang bagay for the children, ginagawa mo pa rin because it is really who you are, it is really part of your true self. Now, the false self, it is a protective facade daw. Then minsan uma-arise or ginagamit itong true self na ito in order to impress other people, or also in order to fit in. Just for example, kahit hindi mo talaga bet, or kung hindi mo talaga gusto yung isa ka music, but you act like you really like it, you really like a certain music in order to fit in with your friends. So para sa iyo, in order for you to fit in with your friends, then dapat sinasabayan mo or ginugusto mo yung mga trend, yung mga music, yung mga bagay na gusto nila kahit hindi mo talaga yun gusto. So it's like a way for you to impress them or to please them. Kaya ginagawa mo yun. So it is what we call the false self. Okay, so I have a question. Kailan madalas lumalabas or kailan madalas ginagamit ng isang tao or natin yung false self? Kailan natin ito ginagamit? When ginagamit itong false self in order to gain approval, avoid rejection, or protect himself or herself from emotional harm. For instance, madalas itong uma-arise especially sa mga social comparison or the peer pressure. For instance, if you as a student, if you are often compared with by you compared by your parents sa mga iba mong kaklase, for instance with your friends, kino-compare ka ng parents mo na sinasabihan ka na anak yung mga kaklase mo mga matalino, magaling sa lahat ng subjects and nag-excel, mataas yung mga grades nila, then kumbaga there is the comparison, and with that parang napipressure ka. So what you are going to do is you act like matalino ka, ginagawa mo talaga yung sorry guys for interruption again. Okay, so let's go back. So yun nga, the comparison, the comparison when your parents compare you with other students, with your friends, kaya ang ginagawa mo is you are acting like matalino even if you really are not, you are really not. So with that, it's your false self, ginagawa mo yun, ginagamit mo or sinusuot mo yung false self mo in order to please your parents, in order to protect yourself from emotional harm, para hindi ka masaktan na always kanilang tinitingnan na less compared to your classmates. So yun, often again, false self often arises especially in gaining approval, in avoiding rejection. So adolescents tend to show their false self in social or dating situations. So we adolescents daw, ginagamit natin yung false self natin in social or dating situation. Just for example, the best example yung uma-attend ka sa mga formal event. So for example, umattend ako sa formal event, then I will act formal not because it is my attitude or not because I am formal talaga or ito talaga yung pagkatao ko, but because I act in accordance to the rules in order na hindi ko ma-violate yung mga rules. So dapat if yung event is a formal event, then you will act professionally, or you will act formally kasi yun yung role, yun yung rule. And then sa dating situations daw, of course, especially when you are dating with someone, especially kung first date nyo, then you will really wear this false self kasi nakakahiya naman kung ipapakita mo sa, during your first date with your romantic partner, nakakahiya naman kung ipapakita mo kaagad yung mga tunay mong ugali. Just for example, yung kung mahilig kang tumawa ng malakas, then babawasan mo yun. Kumbaga, kung tatawa ka, medyo yung mahinhin lang, hindi mo talaga pinapakita. It's because, pa siya, kumbaga, nandun ka sa dating situation, kumbaga, first, pa lang yun, kumbaga, in order for you to have, or to build good impression to someone. So, yun yung ginagamit natin yung ating false self. And then, while their true self emerges with family or trusted friends, of course, this true self really appears especially when we are comfortable. So when we are comfortable with our friends, with our trusted family, with the trusted people na nagsusurround sa atin, dun lumalabas yung ating true self, yung tunay nating ugali, because we are comfortable and we are not afraid of being judged kasi sila yung trusted people natin, and then we can do whatever we want. So yun yung ating true self. Okay, so that's all for my discussion.